You're watching StratNewsGlobal. I'm Ramananda Sengupta. Here at the Raisina Dialogue in New Delhi, and I'm thrilled to have our guest for today, Mr. Stephen Clemons, editor-at-large, national interest and award-winning website, and he's also the co-chair of GLOBSEC, the US Initiative of GLOBSEC, an NGO that aims to strengthen transatlantic security. Thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us.
Very glad to be with you.
Let me start with my last thing about strengthening transatlantic security. How is that possible now?
I think it's going to be tough and complicated, but I think at the end of the day, and I don't mean to be in any way minimize the stress or tension caused by a very different direction that President Trump is taking U.S. foreign policy. He's making it much more defined by very clear national objectives that are about the United States and not about the world. I mean, the real issue is NATO and the transatlantic relationship used to be a function of American security, but now he's defining those as a function of European security that we contribute to, or we Americans contribute to. And I think that there's going to be an instability in that arena for a while, but there are common, overlapping, fundamental interests that will drive some cooperation together on occasion. So, I tell everybody it's not going to go from 100 to 0. We may go from 100 to 60 or something of that sort, and that's still a staggering change in the confidence that people had in that relationship. But to your basic question, it makes it very difficult.
But there is an argument that says that all these days the Europeans were actually thriving simply because they knew the Americans had their back. Right? They could help set up social security and other things simply because they didn't have to spend so much on defense. And now they're suddenly being told that you've got to spend 5% or more on defense. They're going to face a lot of internal troubles, right?
Well, I think there's something to that argument. I think a lot of the social welfare state in Europe was able to be put in place because they didn't have to make the same kinds of defense industry expenses that the United States is making. But there's a trade-off there. I mean, I remember hearing for the first time about strategic autonomy of Europe, a decade ago, or other discussions about European defense identity and defense decisions. And the United States would preempt the direction of Europe moving in that direction because that would undermine American influence and American choices. So you got to understand, NATO and European security was a social contract where we're providing a lot of public goods for Europe in the means of security. We also have a very strong economic relationship, but at the same time, it minimizes Europe's influence on these key decisions. Europe was to fall in line behind the United States as it defined its global national security objectives. That's now been broken, at least temporarily.
But when you look at it like that, you mentioned strategic autonomy. That's a phrase that we in India have been using a lot.
Yes.
And
I think Donald Trump likes India I think he respects strategic autonomy in India in the sense that you're not drawing on other powers to help backstop your security. And so I think he wants Europe in that place, and he wants America's security objectives to be much more narrowly defined.
A couple of last questions. There is one sort of a word going around that on May 9th, when Russia celebrates its National Day, we probably find Trump, Putin, and Xi together on the same platform. And chances of that, apparently it implies that, they'll farm out the wood themselves. Do you think that's a possibility?
That there's a G2 of sorts between them?
G3 now.
Or G3 with India?
Not India.
Oh.
I'm talking about Trump, Xi Jinping, and Putin.
Vladimir Putin. Look, I don't buy it completely for the following reasons. China and Xi Jinping, and in my view, India, are the two most significant global powers out there other than the United States. Russia has nuclear weapons, but its economy is basically the size of Italy. It has huge oil and energy resources, so it has energy weight in the world, but it is not a geostrategic champion of the size and scale of China or of India. So in my book, I would put the fact that there's no way that Putin, Xi Jinping, and Donald Trump would be able to call the things, in part because the United States is in strategic contraction. It's pulling back from things. So it's going to have less influence. The world is going to be more chaotic, more messy, more ad hoc and a la carte on all of the big transnational challenges out there. India is going to become more important, and China has been benefiting dramatically from the changes, in my view, that a lot of the investments they've made around the world with the Belt and Road Initiative, investment in infrastructure development in Africa, Southeast Asia, these things are really paying off for China as you see the US kind of extracting itself from some of these global positions it has had. So I don't buy the notion of Xi, Trump, and Putin, being the kind of global titans that decide everything.
I hope that doesn't happen, because it's just going to be a pretty nightmarish kind of a situation, particularly for India.
I still think it'll be messy.
Oh, it's going to be messy, but definitely. I mean, people here are calling Trump disruptor in chief, so I mean, he is. You never know what he's going to come up with next. But tell me something.
He is undoing a lot of the basic fundamental elements of U.S. foreign policy in the world. We're going to have to rethink a lot of things. And actually, I just want to put on the table that I think there was a lot of inertia and a lot of lousy thinking and laziness built into our national security and foreign policy postures and policies. And the size of the Pentagon was ridiculously too big. And when you look at the national intelligence bureaucracy of the United States, a Pulitzer Prize winning author friend of mine, Dana Priest, would writing about it's so big and sprawling around the world, it's almost impossible to have oversight of. So the shrinkage of all of this, the shocking of it, is not necessarily a bad thing. The cruelty of it and the way it's being done is something I don't agree with. But shaking it up so that you have to figure out what sorts of assets do you need for the U.S. national security in the future. What does a transatlantic relationship look like under new terms? Some of these things can be good in the long run, but it's going to be rocky as we go through this process.
Things might get a bit worse before they get better.
That's right.
Last question. I know I told you 10 minutes. You mentioned India and you were pretty positive about it, even in that last session that you wanted. But there is a school of thought here which says that, while the government believes that, they've got Trump figured out and we can work with him, there are some who say that, you can't trust the Americans, number one. Here, I don't think it's a matter of trust. It's a matter of mutual benefit, whatever it is. But do you think it is that easy for people to just say, I know how the guy works, so I can work with him?
I think there is this confidence that Trump's transactionalism and Trump's tendency to do things in which he has self-interest makes him a predictable and rational actor enough that other nations feel need to do them. It's really interesting. I've been all around the world and talked to leaders in Southeast Asia and Africa. Donald Trump has said some terrible things about African leaders. African leaders kind of like Donald Trump. They like the honesty of the relationship. They know where he is. They know if they do something with him that he will likely do it. So there's this dimension to Trump that appeals to many leaders. I think the broader fundamental question, and it affects Europeans more and maybe the Japanese, is that states that counted on America to cover them in their dark days have to worry, because the calculus behind that for the US president is going to be different. He's going to say, no, I'm not going to support, our alliance and our agreement, Article 5 of the NATO treaty, the bilateral, Japan-US security arrangement, unless you give us or give me something new. So he's renegotiating all of these relationships. And I don't know how Prime Minister Modi and India work, but I imagine that Modi finds that transactional dimension of the U.S. important. It's also, India is not hyper dependent on the United States for anything other than maybe trade, but our trade issues are, our trade tariffs are impacting India. Your exports are down significantly to the United States. It's going to affect the human talent that would move. I mean, our software industry in the United States has benefited tremendously from Indian talent in the United States, and that human capital is going to have a hard time moving across boundaries and borders much more in this new world. So there are going to be real costs in the relationship, and sometimes they're going to feel nasty. But overall, geopolitically, I think India and the United States are going to have a better time getting along in the near term than Europe broadly and the United States, which is going to undergo a tremendous amount of stress.
On that note, I know I've taken more questions than I should have.
Thank you. Well, what a pleasure. Great talking to you.
Absolutely.
Great questions.
And I'll look forward to grabbing you again online. Don't forget
Have
that.
deal. Great. Thank you
so
very much.
That was Stephen Clemons, editor-at-large, National Interest, talking to us about Donald Trump and what India, China, and the rest of the world can expect from him. And while he seems upbeat about what India can do with Trump, he's also warning us that it's not going to be that easy. I do hope you enjoyed this particular edition of The Gist, and I look forward to seeing you again. Till then, this is Ramananda Sengupta signing out.